The Resident Evil series, once praised for its unique and scary as shit take on the survival horror genre, the series is now viewed as a boring as shit action series that sometimes gets it right with its games, but usually... wait a minute.
What the fuck am I doing? Why am I playing Resident Evil? I was working on an instruction manual retrospective, and then... When the hell did those pop up? Who put them there?
It was me. I am the other RBD guy. And it's time you start making the right kinds of videos, asshole.
Wait a minute. The other RBD guy? That's impossible. There's only one Retrospectives-Be-Damned guy, and that's me, pal.
I'm not the Retrospectives-Be-Damned guy. I don't give a shit's kick to Asia about the past. It's the future that's important, my friend. The future needs all of our attention and has to be focused upon. I am the Rumors-Be-Damned guy.
The Rumors-Be-Damned guy? So you're more interested in what's going to happen instead of what's already happened? That's just dumb, man.
It is not dumb. It is the only way. The true way.
Why did you give me all those Resident Evil games? Those are all past releases. I don't see any betas in that pile.
It's an experiment.
So what? You just expect me to play some Resident Evil games?
And you tell your personal stories about them.
Are you kidding me? You just expect me to do that? I have things planned. I'll just play the main series.
Perfect. Let the experiment commence.
Okay. So like I was saying, the Resident Evil series was a great series, but recent speed bumps have kind of made fans a little bit iffy about the quality and overall direction of the series. Now, while fans totally have something legitimate to complain about, let's focus on something else for now. Let's take a look at my personal history on the series, and my thoughts on it.
The first Resident Evil was great. It wasn't the first game in the series I had played, so I had some issues with it that the future games had already fixed. The controls weren't as tight as future games, but were pretty much the same tank controls I was used to. The puzzles were way harder than the other games I had played, and were damn near impossible for my younger self to figure out. And yes, I was very young when I first started playing the Resident Evil series. I was in 4th fucking grade and was playing these games. I wasn't scared with them or anything like that. I actually thought the gameplay was really cool, and the whole idea of exploring this area where something horrible had happened was so cool. I was instantly hooked on the series within moments of playing it. The dog jumping through the window did scare the hell out of me though. In my defense, that scared everyone. Now about the voice acting. What can be said that hasn't already been said? It's fucking horrible, but in that it's so bad it's great kind of way.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Some people have theorized that Capcom purposely made it bad to give it a B-movie style to it, but I guess that's up to interpretation. A director's cut was released a year later that had an advanced mode that changed the main character's costumes, placed items in different locations, and changed some of the camera angles. It also came with a demo of the then-to-be-released Resident Evil 2, along with a $5 off coupon for it.
Overall, my younger self loved Resident Evil, and I still love it. It wasn't my favorite Resident Evil game, and I actually thought it was the hardest game in the series at the time, but it had a kind of charm to it that could still be felt to this day.
Ugh! That game looks horrid! Those backgrounds and those blocky character models look hideous. Who would play this game knowing that all these great current-gen titles are coming out? Have you seen PT? The game is going to be horrifically wonderful!
Can I just continue?
Yes, the experiment must continue. Go on.
Alright, so 2 years later, Capcom finally gave us Resident Evil 2, and it was awesome!
The ability to play as two characters came back, but this time it was two new characters. Leon Kennedy, a rookie police officer for Raccoon City, and Claire Redfield, the sister to Chris Redfield. The game expanded on the locations you can go to and had players going through the streets of Raccoon City, the RPD building, the sewers, and eventually the lab at the end of the game. This was the first Resident Evil game I ever played, and subsequently is my favorite one too. I love the idea of being in a city filled with monsters and fighting your way through while solving puzzles. Finding the diaries and notes left from people whose fates were sometimes unknown added so much more to the horror of the situation. Plus, the sci-fi aspect of it being a virus from a lab that caused all of this to happen totally won me over. Leon and Claire were pretty cool too. The game also had a variety of ways to replay it. Leon and Claire both had two different storylines you could play from called Scenario A and Scenario B. I believe the canon scenarios were Claire A and Leon B, which was my personal favorite to begin with. Overall, Resident Evil 2 was an excellent game that got me not only hooked on the series, but also the survival horror genre as well.
Next up is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Huh. I'm surprised you don't interrupt me. Yeah. That makes more sense.
Capcom then made Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, also known as Biohazard 3 Last Escape in Japan. This was not really supposed to be the third Resident Evil game. Code Veronica, the next game, was more or less intended to be it. But Capcom really wanted a trilogy on PlayStation, so the three stuck with Nemesis. The game was interesting as chronologically, it takes place 24 hours before and after Resident Evil 2, thus making it a prequel and a sequel at the same time. You spend more time in Raccoon City's streets, and you even get to visit the police station again. Jill, from the original Resident Evil, returns as the main character, though you briefly play as another character named Carlos for a segment of the game. The big thing about the sequel is a monster named Nemesis that chased you around from location to location. He could never die and would keep coming back to get you, like Michael Myers or something. It also added a new type of horror aspect of always being on the run and never knowing when you were really safe. I remember really enjoying it when it first came out. The week I bought it, I was telling a friend of mine at school about it, and how cool it was that the Nemesis monster chases you from place to place. The first thing he said was, "I could beat it in a day." Normally, I don't challenge my friends, but I thought that was a load of shit. I didn't think he could do it, so I totally called him out on it. He accepted my challenge and borrowed the game from me on Friday, and then came over to my house on Saturday to show me his results. When he came over, he told me he pulled an all-nighter to beat it, and showed me the save file with the ending results. I couldn't believe it, so I fucking called him out on it again. I told him he could have used Game Shark or something like that. And so, he accepted my challenge again. He slept over, and both he and I pulled an all-nighter, and he beat it again, right in front of me. I never doubted my friend again.
That seems reckless. How would you keep up with all the gaming news and speculations being released if you don't sleep for 2 days straight? You'd have the worst level of attention. Those rumors don't read themselves.
Because I'm sure that's what he was thinking of after not getting 2 nights of sleep. Whatever. Next on the list is Resident Evil Code Veronica, which at the time of its release was actually a Dreamcast exclusive. This pissed off a lot of Sony fanboys, and it wasn't until much later that a different version of the game was released on PlayStation 2. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about that version a little later.
I remember making my dad drive all the way to another city to pick this game up. It was a 40-minute drive, and the whole time I went on and on about how goddamn excited I was. This was probably the most hyped I ever got over a Resident Evil game. Code Veronica had players go back into the boots of Claire and Chris Redfield, with Chris having not been seen since the original Resident Evil. Claire was still on her personal quest to save her brother, and Chris ends up getting involved in the whole Code Veronica ordeal in order to save his sister. I still remember how epic Chris's intro was. Climbing this giant cliff with epic music blaring through. It was a great moment for the time that game came out. Overall, I really enjoyed the game back when it was first released, but it's lost its touch on me now. Some people call it the last great classic-style Resident Evil, a title which I personally think is carried by another game in the series. I actually found Code Veronica to be cumbersome and lacking in features. Despite being planned as the true follow-up to Resident Evil 2, I think Resident Evil 3 did it better. Code Veronica lacks so many features and improvements that Nemesis had that it's hard to switch back to an older style when playing the games in release order. It is still a fun game that has some really great moments, but it didn't really stick with me as much as the others did.
I mentioned earlier the PlayStation 2 version of the game, and it was pretty cool. It was sort of like a director's cut version of the game that had a few new changes to it and 10 minutes of cinematic footage added to it. But, I was always kind of bummed out that the Dreamcast version of the game never came out in America. It only came out in Japan. I kind of wanted to have both versions on the Dreamcast to complete my collection, but, whatever.
Did you consider pre-ordering an import copy? PlayAsia does that sometimes.
I was 13 when that game came out. I didn't know anything about importing. But I love doing it now. I actually just imported the entire Metal Gear series from Japan.
I love Metal Gear. Which one is your favorite?
Metal Gear Solid. I am totally doing a video on that in the future. What's yours?
Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain.
That hasn't came out yet.
But have you seen the newest footage? That game is going to be amazing.
So after the whole Dreamcast exclusive thing, you'd think that Capcom would try something new for their next game in the main series. They did. Capcom announced that they and Nintendo had signed a deal to release the next few games in the main series of Resident Evil exclusively on the GameCube. The games they announced were a remake of Resident Evil, a prequel to Resident Evil called Resident Evil 0, and the long-awaited Resident Evil 4. The first one they released was the remake of Resident Evil, and it was fucking awesome.
Completely remade from the ground up and looking amazing, Resident Evil's remake was epic. I still think it's one of the best looking and scariest games ever made. The storyline was pretty much the same as the original game, except for some added content. A new character named Lisa Trevor was added, as well as some backstory involving her family and their link to the creation of the Spencer Mansion. Some other gameplay elements were added, like defense items, that help you avoid taking a hit from zombies and other enemies. To me, this was the last great overall classic Resident Evil game. Even though it was a remake of the first title, it had so many new elements that made the game seem fresh and new.
Capcom started off great with their exclusive GameCube Resident Evil games. That same year, another Resident Evil game came out. One that had at one point been in development for the N64. That game was Resident Evil 0.
Taking place before all of the games in the series thus far, Resident Evil 0 has players control Rebecca Chambers, the medic from Bravo team that helped out Chris in the original Resident Evil, and Billy Cohen, an escaped convict with a mysterious past. The game's story to me was a bit out there for a Resident Evil game, but it was still enjoyable, just not the best. The main feature of this game had players control both characters for the entire storyline, which Capcom made surprisingly pretty user-friendly to do. You could switch between characters on the fly, solve puzzles involving two people, exchange items, and fight enemies together. Speaking of items, this game was the first to remove the item boxes from the previous games. Instead, players can just drop their items on the floor. I remember some people loved this, and some people found it confusing since you could drop your items anywhere and then forget where you dropped it. I was in the middle. It made things both convenient and annoying at the same time. This was also, as of 2014, the last Resident Evil game done in the classic style, with fixed camera angles, tank controls, and a heavy emphasis on puzzles spanning huge environments. I really do think the remake of Resident Evil was the best of the classic games, but Zero was pretty cool as well.
So now we go up to the next game in the Resident Evil series, Resident Evil 4. And here is where I become a minority amongst the Resident Evil fanbase, because, to be quite honest, I didn't really like the game very much. I remember the hype leading up to it was phenomenal, and I kept seeing it at all these different E3 events, and the game kept changing dramatically every single time they showed it. I was psyched. I was super excited. And then the game came out and I kind of didn't care about it. I remember playing it and thinking this felt very un-Resident Evil, and I beat it, but it just wasn't really my thing. Now, I know what Capcom was trying to do. I wasn't stupid. I know that at the time they were trying to make this Resident Evil game feel very different from past Resident Evil games, but I guess at the time of release it just felt very awkward.
So let me understand this correctly. You enjoyed all the hype, including the rumors and speculations, leading up to the game's release, but then became completely disinterested in the title when it was released?
Yeah, I guess that's sorta right.
So at one point in time, you and I agreed on rumors and speculations being better than the final product.
No. Shut up! That's not true!
Yes, it is! This experiment was a success! I knew I would find something within you! Go on, RBD guy! Finish your retrospective on that old horror series! My work here is done! We will meet again!
He's actually on Skype, so he's probably still there.
Could you please hang up?
Yep.
There are so many other main series games after Resident Evil 4. They brought back Chris, Jill, and Albert Wesker for Resident Evil 5, which I actually enjoyed even though it was more of an action game. Resident Evil Revelations brought Jill and Chris back again, as well as the horror aspect of the series. Then finally Resident Evil 6 came out, and even though I was insanely excited for it, it ended up being pretty bad, and a bit over the top. So now we look to the future, Resident Evil Revelations 2, which brings back Claire Redfield and introduces Barry Burton's daughter, Moira Burton. The game looks interesting with the little we know so far, and it looks like it's going to have more horror elements in it again. Here's hoping it does.
So those were my important memories on the Resident Evil game series. I still play the series to this day, but I'm not as big of a fan as I was when the classic games were out. But still, let's hope that Capcom takes a little more caution moving forward with the series and releases some more quality titles that we could appreciate. So anyway, guys, as I always say, Retrospectives-Be-Damned, I'm telling my... Okay, wait a minute. Who the hell was that guy earlier? I'm not going to ignore all this. Who the hell was he? Where did he come from? Why the hell was he telling me to play Resident Evil? Why was he so strange?
Will the RBD guy find out who the other RBD guy is? Does wearing a necktie on a t-shirt make any sense? And who is this owl? Find out next year for another season of Retrospectives-Be-Damned. Okay, I recorded it. Where's my paycheck?